Hello and welcome to the Imagine AI Live podcast. I'm your host, Chêrénique, and we are here in New York City at the first Impact event. I have with me today one of our speakers. Hello and welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me.
My pleasure. So please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you're working on.
Awesome. Yeah, so I'm Tricia Maia. I'm head of product at TED, like TED Talks. So I lead product management, design, analytics, support, and localization for all of our digital experiences. So that's our websites, our apps, our media and data platforms, our internal tools, event tech, and everything in between.
Wow, so you just do a few things.
Just a little, yeah.
Just a few. So how do you implement AI into that, or do you?
Yeah, I think just my background is as a product person. I was a product manager for many years at startups, at bigger companies, and more recently I've started managing product teams. And for me, it's always about kind of going back to first principles and user needs. What problems are you trying to solve? For whom? What are the opportunities that exist for those people? Yeah. Everything is within that context, and then you look at what solutions are available. And I think the beauty of AI is that there are so many more solutions and tools at our disposal that weren't before. But for me, it's really important to not have a solution in search of a problem, but really start with the core user need. Mm-hmm. And so we think a lot about accessibility of our content. And so TED Talks are in English, but they're in many other languages as well. However, most of our flagship conference talks are just in English. And we've had subtitles and transcripts for years. We have an amazing volunteer community of 60,000 translators.
Wow.
Yeah, so they are fantastic, and they translate a lot of our written content. So if you're watching a talk, you could read the subtitles in your language. But more recently, we started working with an AI dubbing company named Panjaya. They do audio translation, but they are also leaning into voice cloning and lip syncing. So it makes the talk appear very realistic in whatever language it's being dubbed into. So I could be giving a talk in English, and then it translates me into Italian and Spanish and French, and I don't speak all of those languages.
But it's going to look sound like you do.
Exactly. It uses my voice and everything. And so for us, that was important because I personally find dubbing very kind of awkward and clunky, like your traditional dubbing, like the sound never matches what's actually happening in the scene. Mm-hmm. And so with this, it's a way for you to just kind of sit back and relax and access our content in ways that you haven't been before. And for us, this is about reaching our existing international audiences. We have a huge international audience. A lot of them don't speak English, but there's so many people that have never watched a TED Talk because they don't want to bother with reading, in addition to watching the talk. So now we're able just to reach so many more people than we have been before.
Amazing.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. Mm-hmm. So when did you first start looking into AI or hearing about it?
I think AI has been around for a long time. It's kind of become synonymous with just technology, and I know a lot of folks have been really doing great work in machine learning and other adjacent fields for a very long time. I think, like everyone, when ChatGPT came on the scene, that was the explosion or wake-up call for us to pay attention to what was happening, and all of these new innovations and experimentations that were happening. It was almost overwhelming at first. So it's like, where do I look? Where do I focus? And everyone was just kind of putting a chatbot onto their site and just hoping for the best. So, we did experiment with things, and we're just trying to keep up, honestly. And so I think it's really, once things died down after a few months, really kind of, again, going back to who are the people we're trying to serve and what do they need and how can we potentially use these different tools. Not every AI has to be a chatbot, for example. And so that's why we're leaning into just different adaptations and usages of this technology that we couldn't before.
Yeah, absolutely. So how did you get introduced to the Imagine AI Live community?
Yeah, I met Liz a few months ago at a dinner. I think it was an AI dinner, and it was just kind of serendipitous, and I remember the organizer made everyone go around and introduce themselves, which was kind of painful. I think there were like 60 people at the dinner, and of course, we went last. So, but it was a good way just to know who was in the room. And then she reached out, and because we were working so heavily with this AI dubbing project, it just made a lot of sense. So I was happy to be invited.
Great. Yeah. Well, we're happy to have you. Yeah. Thank you so much for coming.
Yeah.
So we are here at the Cornell Tech campus. What would you say to students, or what advice would you give that are coming into university on the cusp of AI really expanding and taking off, and how that's going to affect them in their schooling? Do you have anything you would say to them?
Yeah, I think I'm sure it's been said before, but I love the quote that AI is not going to take your job. It's someone who knows how to use AI. And I think that is true for working professionals and students alike. And so I think about, whether you're going into a tech field or not, thinking about ways and tools and resources that are now available to you to help you kind of leapfrog your learning. So if you're an engineer or want to be an engineer, you don't necessarily have to study computer science. I mean, I'm sure it's beneficial, but using tools like GitHub's Copilot to start the learning process and getting you to accelerate faster into those journeys is key. I mean, speaking for product managers, we have product requirements documents. This is getting very nitty gritty, but we have a lot of data and information coming at us, and it's our job to synthesize that into a coherent product strategy. What are we building for whom? And sometimes you have a blank slate problem, and so it's where do I even start? And so using tools like ChatGPT or ChatPRD to get you started and really just accelerate your learning, I think, is key. So if anything, I would just encourage them to see what's out there. What are you interested in? How can you learn faster and decrease your learning curve? Because I think that's the real value. But yeah, it's definitely a shifting environment. So just staying ahead of the trends is really important as well.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Do you have any fears or concerns with the progression of AI moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, just a lot of what was even chatted about during the conference. There's a lot of questions around copyright and ethics, and I think people are not even sure how to talk about those or tackle them productively. Is it a government problem? Is it an industry problem? How do we tackle these issues before it's too late, essentially? Mm-hmm. I do think there's also it's kind of like a sadness, I guess I would call it. Just, it's amazing, all of the AI generated art and content, but then, what does that mean for human creativity and the creators of the content, the writers, everything off of which these LLMs are built off of, years and decades and centuries of human ingenuity. It's kind of all distilled into an output that took less than a second to create. So it's almost, you could go down a rabbit hole of philosophically, what's the value of human creativity? Mm-hmm. How much do we protect our creators? And I think that's kind of the scariest part for me, is if we get too excited about the novelty and what we can do and all of the gadgets and gizmos that come along with it, we lose the human conversation. And I think that even how to articulate that or have productive conversations around that, I find is really difficult. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of what concerns me.
Yeah. So on the flip side of that then, what hopes do you have for AI moving forward?
Yeah. I think just touching on what I was talking about before, just the ability for people to learn and upskill in ways that weren't possible before. So you don't need necessarily a 4-year college degree to, do something that maybe it did require that in years past. If you're interested in learning about the law or medicine or science, it doesn't mean that there shouldn't be regulatory bodies and we should have some sort of process, but those initial learning curves that really prevent, I think, barriers to people even getting into professions or areas of their interest because they don't think they can afford it or they don't have the time to learn. I think just by reducing that learning curve to so many fields and so many different skills, it will give so many more people options for how to build livelihoods and how to develop themselves personally and professionally.
So if somebody listening right now is thinking about coming to the next Imagine AI Live event, what would you say to them?
Definitely come. There is just so many different perspectives. There's technical talks, there's creative talks. It's all very accessible as well. People are super down to earth and just wanting to connect. So I think it would be fantastic for anyone to join.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being on today.
All right. Thank you so much.